Hey everyone, I'm Kasha, the founder of MindQuest, and today I'm really excited to have Elle Monus with me. Elle is a people and operations consultant, and she's got a really deep understanding of how organizations grow, adapt, and sometimes fall apart. She's had over 15 years of experience helping organizations which are building functional workplaces and teams. Elle, I'm really happy to have you here today because I think it's such an important time for us to be having these conversations with so much disruption happening. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
So, I'd love to start with a really huge question for you. This idea of when organizations start to fall apart. I really appreciate your firsthand experience in witnessing this and sharing this publicly because I think, too often that thought doesn't even enter the mind. The focus tends to be on sort of the older status quo of how things have been. And I'm really curious what your experience and perspective has been with this.
Yeah, so I generally work in early stage startups, generally on the tech side, kind of out of Silicon Valley, and only a very small percentage of those companies actually make it to what they call the unicorn stage or $1 billion valuation. So I'm often in these small companies that'll start right around zero and then they scale up very quickly to 100 or a couple hundred people within the first couple of years, which gives you an opportunity to kind of see that full cycle of business that you would get in a traditional environment over a much longer period of time. So there are a lot of opportunities in there for things to kind of fall apart. There's a lot of little gaps you can fall into. There's a lot of tricks like poor leadership that can take you down the wrong path that eventually they don't make it. I think the percentage is like 0.0006 of those companies make it to a successful finish, either by exit or going public. So I've seen a lot of both. I've seen a lot of really incredible successes, and I've seen kind of how it can go so wrong so fast that you almost don't even see it coming. And I can definitely give examples of those kind of as we go along. But is there anything specific that caught your eye specifically about where you wanted me to dive into that?
Well, let's just say, if I was a founder, I would really like
Mhm.
to know, if I'm a tech founder, what are the top three things that go wrong that I need to be aware of, right? If I
Yeah.
haven't had this experience yet. And I think if we just look at, like what would you say is the number one most common thing that you've seen go wrong?
Yeah. Poor leadership. And that is, it kind of presents itself in a couple of different ways. But if you have the wrong person kind of trying to grow this thing, whether it's lack of experience or lack of understanding of what that particular team needs, you can flip a team so fast that your company is done within a month, right? Like it's super important to get that leadership right. And I prefer, obviously, that relationship building kind of approach versus the authoritarian approach, kind of in that leadership. Because when you're building these teams, you're moving, especially if you're one of these faster growing companies, you're moving so fast that if you can't keep people rowing the boat in the same direction, the same way at the same time, then your boat kind of starts to splinter and fall apart. And once all of those parts start going in the wrong direction, or one part malfunctions so much that it affects the rest of the boat, you don't have a boat to get you where you want to go at the end of the day. So now you're just kind of stranded out there in the ocean, when it may have just taken a different kind of meeting structure or a different kind of personal approach that builds that trust. I had one early stage startup fairly recently that they'd been together a couple of years and they were doing really well. They were doubling year over year, and there was, this outside influence that came in kind of disrupted it, and the boat got shaken. And eventually, the investor said, you know what, this boat, it's a little, with inside outside factors, it's a little too sketchy, we're not going to do the next round of funding, which is
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily uncommon, right? It happens all the time if we look at the numbers. But this particular team had such a strong core, and they had such a really good relationship with the CEO and I, that they all stayed on unpaid and worked kind of through that period to get them through back to cash flow positive and be able to run the business without that investor help. So people will do incredible things for you if you treat them well and you have a great relationship. But if you do the wrong thing, that company would have been dead in the water right then. That CEO would have been out of luck.
Mm-hmm. So the loyalty. So how long did this team stick around?
Months. It was months. So it was originally, the whole team stayed for a couple of weeks just to kind of get the business to a place where it could function with them in a part-time space or while they were doing something else. And then as the company kind of grew back, they pulled people back in for paid positions. If they had not already gotten a job, or if they did get a job, they stayed on kind of in a consulting position to get the new person in and running. So it's a matter of, people obviously have financial reasons to stay or go, and you have to do the right thing for you as an employee. But if you truly do believe in what you're doing and believe in the person that's kind of leading that ship, the likelihood that they're going to push you through those hard times is much higher.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what are some, just examples of poor leadership behaviors, or what do you think are the things that would lead to a company falling apart?
Yeah, I think focusing on the wrong thing is the most common one that I see. So we saw recently, kind of at a national level, that email that went out that said, "Send me 5 things that you did this week," and that's not uncommon in this tech world, and I would imagine even in the traditional world, you have people that want that insight into kind of what you're doing as an employee. And employees generally don't enjoy that kind of micromanagement. And I think that's across the board. I think that you can get that same information, that same concept, that same idea of what you want to get done in either a structured meeting or just in more relationship-based talks in a one-on-one. So if you're so focused on micromanaging versus letting the experts that you hire kind of direct where they know is the right place to go, then you start kind of diminishing that creativity and that desire for them to want to drive forward. They're going to start waiting on you to give more approval, whether they are that type of employee or not. They're going to read you because you hold their paycheck. So if you're holding their paycheck, they're going to watch you and they're going to see how you want them to behave, and they're going to behave in that way. If you go to them and you say, "You know what, you're the expert. This is the goal that I need to accomplish. We're going to have meeting cadences at this point, and this point. Bring this and this and this to that meeting," people will do generally what you tell them to do. If they are not doing what you ask them to do, then you have the opportunity to go in and figure out what that bug is. Is it a tool issue? Is it a knowledge issue? Is it something? But the answer very well could be you as the CEO, and you've got to get out of your own way sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so aside from poor leadership and these blind spots that leaders can have, and it is a tough role to navigate, right? Because you're really having to set the tone. Is there anything else that you feel would be valuable for our listeners to be aware of, just to keep an eye on and make sure that they've got these things accounted for?
We're still kind of in this space where we're trying to figure out what that employee-employer relationship is going to look like. So your top companies are offering top benefits, top things. You may not have, the money to do those things, but you can show investment in your employees in a different way. And one of the ways that I really like to think about that is development. So development is one of the major reasons, if not the major reason, why employees leave. And over 50% of them will leave because they're not being developed in their role specifically. Some want a personal development. And I am probably a little new age in this idea, right? Where you can develop people personally and develop them out of your organization and still have a really good relationship with them. We see this national turnover rate of about 12 to 18 months for our new generations kind of coming in. So you're not keeping people more than 2 years as a general rule anymore. It's just the nature has changed. So if you want somebody that's going to come in and stay with you for a very long time, you're going to have to find a way to develop them and to grow them. And one of the ways that I like to do that is career pathing. So you can take that route and you can develop people to be better in your succession planning, or if you are in a company that relies on other companies and spaces, you could develop them up, move them into another space outside of your organization where they could still be beneficial to you. So there's this huge underdevelopment in the way that we think about how a community actually builds a business, and that people and relational aspect all goes into that. So those are the two places that I think are the biggest deal for CEOs. And it's hard when you're in that CEO seat to see these and to always be very cognizant of that, because you have so much stress and you're thinking of so many things, and ultimately you're the one that's responsible, and there's no way for you to be into the details of all of these at all times as a CEO. And that can be frustrating and you lose sight of it. But being the difference between a really good CEO and a phenomenal CEO is being able to manage yourself kind of in that regard, and make sure that you set some time aside to kind of get in there and look around and see what people are doing. Because they, again, you get them on your team, they're going to rally behind you every time.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So, if you think about some of the reasons why CEOs or companies don't develop people, what do you think are the reasons for that? Is it just an oversight that they're focusing on fundraising and other activities? Is it something else?
I think it's twofold. One, it's not something that we've ever really considered in business before, right? We knew, people like promotions. They want to move up in the company. We've always known that. We tend to focus on our top performers for that. But the idea and the concept is fairly new, to develop people in a very holistic way, kind of in that space. The second reason is that people are very expensive. And CEOs and investors don't like to spend a lot of money on stuff that you don't necessarily see a very tangible return on. So we're still kind of, especially in the people operations space, we're still understanding how to show those results in a tangible way, right? We have data that shows that healthy and happy employees like 10x your productivity, but we still see a lot of pushback in wanting to spend in that space, because it's expensive. People are expensive. And investors in the tech space are starting to move further away from large people teams and more AI. So we're going to have to either really start investing more in the people that we have left to make sure that we can develop them in a way that helps build what's coming next, or we figure something out completely new for what the next generation of businesses are going to look like.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I find it really interesting. Here in Canada, we've had a productivity issue where there's been a lack of investment overall, from businesses in people and technology. And I think that often they just don't know where to invest. There's that fear of investing in the wrong direction. So what's your perception of, if you had to choose between right now investing in people and investing in technology at this time in the age of AI, what would you
Yeah.
do as a founder?
I'm getting a lot of questions and pushback on people right now when I'm talking to investors in these companies. I would say the majority of the newer companies that are startups of investors that have already done this a few times are looking at this agentic AI as the next internet, right? So it will change things as much as the internet did. So I think that it's hard for me to say as a people ops person, but I think that AI it's got to have some focus right now. I think that you've got to focus on it, but you're going to have to develop and reskill your people to get there, because not a large enough portion of the population understands how to utilize those tools just yet. And if you build an entire industry or company on a tool that very few people know how to use, you're setting yourself up for some difficult times in the future. So reskilling people now to be able to move into these new roles will not only be good for society as a whole, but will also help kind of drive that growth in that business, because you're going to have people that now have the tools and the understanding to go and build the new things with the new tools that will make you way more money. So it's tough to give a solid answer. I think it's a proportional answer, but there is definitely that human aspect that we're absolutely going to have to watch out for to make sure that society can move itself together without splintering into two parts: the ultra rich that know how to use these tools, and the people that were never reskilled and their jobs are gone now. We've got to find something for those people to do, and I think that that's worth an investment.
Mm-hmm. And so now that we're in the age of AI, I understand you mentioned, skilling people up. What else do you think is important for leaders to be doing, thinking about right now in this moment?
Yeah, there's a lot of general overwhelm, especially down here, kind of in the US. We're at a place of just burnout, I think, in general, with everything that's going on. So getting back to that people development and understanding where people are, and knowing, we talked about that reskilling, but we're going to have to do a little bit of work when you're a leader in a space, which I would consider you and I leaders in spaces that are helping drive the direction of culture and change. I think that it's our responsibility to make sure that those people are also brought with us, right? We have the ability and the education and the experience to be able to see where things are going. And I think that CEOs, because especially the younger generations are going to hold them to it. There's that social aspect of, we want to work for companies that are good for people. And I think that that is going to continue. And I think that it's only going to tenfold as we start to see more and more changes that start making people a little bit more and more nervous. So we're going to have to channel that nervous energy into energy that drives change. And I think that, again, it's one of those things. You can create all of the SOPs that you want. You can work people 10 hours a day for maximum productivity, but at some point you will hit a wall. And the only way around that wall is to do something a little bit different that maybe we haven't explored yet.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds like an area of opportunity. So, do you think that focusing on wellness initiatives at the moment is still a good area to be, focusing time, money on?
I think that it would. I think that we've seen the data come back that the more that you invest in wellness in general, the better your employees do. So I think that investing in people and their wellness is always going to be worth its while. Is it an expensive kind of, huge expense at the beginning? Yeah, it is. But if we're looking long term for what's best for companies and society, I think that we have to find that balance. And I think that investing in wellness, whether it's childcare, which is very expensive, whether it is, gym memberships, if that's what people want, all of these things are kind of those stereotypical, like HR, like, okay, we'll give you this, just like a pizza party. But we have for so long undervalued kind of that human capital, if you will, that if we really start capitalizing on it, if we really, really show that we're invested in them, you will, as a CEO, always do better when people want to do better for you. And the way that you do that is investing. And it comes in so many forms. If it's not that pizza party, it's a phone call or a huddle in Slack that you sit and you have that conversation for 10 minutes to see, what's going on with their kid or what's going on over here. All of that ties into wellness. And it doesn't take as much physical labor as it would, to pack a box for 10 hours a day. It takes a little bit more in emotional labor, but you get tenfold back.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, right? Because I think a lot of CEOs might wonder, well, how do we do wellness, especially if it's starting to get into bigger numbers? Then it's more handing it off to other people. And I think that a really affordable way is really just having quality relationships in the workplace, right? Because having that person that cares, that actually has those conversations that are supportive rather than judgmental or blaming type of conversations, this to me is a huge opportunity that's often missed because there is often a blame culture. The lack of development in leadership skills leads to bad conversations and bad feedback. All of this has a detrimental effect on people and their well-being, and that often does contribute a lot to burnout and disengagement. So to me, this is a missed opportunity that doesn't cost a lot. It costs a little bit of maybe a few extra minutes to be people focused versus task focused.
Yes.
And it has huge dividends. And the energy that people are able to put back into the business, I think, is often just not even a consideration for a lot of people, just because of the tendency to be task focused and getting things done, right? Productivity, so to
Totally agree.
speak.
Yeah, totally agree. We've seen this, I call it survival mode, right? I'm not a psychologist. I don't have formal mental health training, but when we look at it, that survival mode of, if I am worried about being able to pay my next bill, or I don't have someone that I can share, I can't be my true self with, if I can't bring my whole self to work, then I have to really focus on who I can be and who I can present at work. And you spend so much energy trying to be that person that you get to that burnout space a lot faster. So when you're having these conversations, and I do a lot with the people when I have people reporting to me, is I know a lot about their family. I know a lot about their personal life. And then that also helps me direct them if, productivity goes down somehow. I can be like, what is going on? There's something, there's something here. It's an outlier. You're not doing, what the numbers that you usually do, like what's going on. And then they're more comfortable saying, I'm going through this rough patch. My kid has been sick. I've taken care of my mother-in-law. They've got a million different things. And maybe they're a single parent, or, a child that's doing caregiving that has nobody else to kind of lean on. And you spend so much time at work that the natural place where you would want to be able to share those things with is where you're around the people that you're with every day. And it is, like you said, it's just this underexplored area of leadership. I like the servant leadership, I may be the person that you report into, but I can still help you, send you a coffee, or send you a sweet note that's a little pep talk on a day that I know you have a big meeting that you're worried about. Those little things go so far, because they're genuine and they mean a lot to people. And I've mentioned the pizza party a couple of times because it's that you see the memes about it all the time. Here's 80 hours of extra work for you to do, but we'll give you a pizza party. People see through those things, and they see it as a cheap payment or a cheap buyout for their trust and time. And what they really want is that genuine interaction that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and you mentioned that often people don't stay more than 2 years. I do think that a lot of that is the function of, they have other options currently, and they often aren't getting the experience that they wanted in this company, right? So something has been promised that hasn't materialized, or the relationships with their manager are not as good as they want them to be, and even in startup environments, I've seen situations where there's so much micromanagement, where that person who thought they were going to get all this opportunity to make decisions and to actually, have an exciting role, all of a sudden doesn't get any of that, because there's just so much fear from the founders and so much control, and a lack of collaboration in that sense that drives them away. And then they're afraid to say something because it's not their company. So I think that, bringing these things to the surface is so important, because these are the things that founders don't ever get to know, right? Until somebody is either brave enough to say something, which a lot of the time people just do not do because they don't want to burn their bridges. They want to be able to still have some sort of relationship, or they might never want to talk to that person again.
Yes.
Right.
And, you mentioned developing those frontline supervisors or at what stage, what level of the company do we invest in to build these kind of skills? And I think it's that first line of management that has almost the strongest need and the strongest impact. So when your frontline workers are always going to be the ones that kind of help drive that customer success funnel, right? If you want people coming back for business, you want to make sure that your customers or clients are happy. So how do you do that? Is you manage the people that are managing them well, and you make sure that they have the tools to manage that and to create that environment that then trickles down to your customers, that then is going to produce more profit for you. So if you're giving them these trainings and this understanding so that they can then engage with their teams, it's part of learning how to be a manager. And some people make it so far up the rung without having it, that's when you start seeing this authoritarian, leadership that comes in and just kind of barks at you, instead of being able to have the conversations in a way that is conversational, that is approachable, that makes people want to step in and do it. I've never wanted to work harder for someone because they were yelling at me. I know that, especially, down here in the States, we have, as we're growing kids up through the culture, whether they're in sports, you have coaches that are more authoritarian. So it takes different approaches, but if you can get the same results without doing whatever damage may come along with the other approach, then let's do a little more of that. Let's make it the standard and see where we end up.
Yeah, certainly. I think that that's an area that's often not considered enough, and part of that is the investment, perhaps in a workshop that's 1 or 2 days for managers, and then nothing is done to support them to implement those skills. So they're often forgotten, right? And then they attend 100 meetings and stop focusing on that workshop that they just attended on change management or whatever it was. So I do think that how that investment is made and having that support for implementation is often a gap that they do need to consider. And so some of the best programs that I've been a part of have been where they first have the introduction, the workshop to those particular skills, and then they've had several coaching sessions to support them with implementation and overcoming some of the barriers. And often I'm too busy is one of those barriers. It comes up all the time. And yet these are the things that they should be integrating to help them in their role, right? So that's often a reason that it doesn't happen. And the other thing that came to mind as you were saying that is that I've worked with so many leaders who are at mid-level who are either suffering because they don't have good support, above them. They don't have development opportunities, and they start to stagnate for 7 years in their role at director or senior manager level. And how do we actually support these people who are in that place because they're not getting coaching or support a lot of the time? They may not have the skills themselves, or they may have the skills, and then it's even more painful for them that they're not getting those kinds of conversations from their leaders. So I'm curious what your experience has been in that. Have you seen the same thing?
Absolutely. So you mentioned something that hit a point for me, that was, let's say you went to a conference, you went and learned all, we have a personal development budget that the company pays for $1,500 a year. You can do a couple of courses, you maybe get a conference out of it. So you go, and like you said, maybe this person already has some of the skills, they're going to get better at them, and then they want to bring them back to the organization. If the organization, especially the people at the higher levels, you don't have buy-in for those projects to come in and do it, then it's going to fall flat every time. So the idea of two-fering it, again, is more complex, but you get the value out of it later. So you spend a little bit of time, like you said, you bring them back in. You also have coaching down the road. I work with one of it's Dallasites is their Instagram. They're one of the big things here in Dallas around social media presence and PR firm and marketing. And they were a company that grew very fast, and they're having to kind of reorganize the organization as they grow and build and do all of these things. And I will still meet with some of their leadership every quarter, every whatever, because I know their story and I know kind of how the company works, and I can help build them in that way, to build those relationships and to help apply the concepts that they were taught. Because you lose it at a certain point if you're not using it, and you only get better at things with practice. So if you can get people in one of my favorite mentors, we would have a weekly call and we would just have these conversations about what we're doing, how I was thinking about it, how she would think about it. And then you have the ability to have harder conversations because you've built that relationship. And you can have conversations where you look at someone and you say, well, I think you're being kind of a jerk on this. Maybe you should think about it another way. But you have all of that time and that buildup of relationship that you can say those things and you can have those hard conversations, and the other person on the other side of the table isn't going to hate you. So if you have that long-term relationship of building and then showing how to apply, you can do it within the organization. You can have a mentorship program. You can have outside consultants, which I think sometimes are more appropriate because it's easier to step in and out without getting stuck in the day-to-day office politics or drama or culture. So you can have these conversations, you can do these things, and you teach them how in every situation that they bring up, you establish this pattern. And once you establish a pattern, you can look at it and you can fix it, or you can optimize it to make it even better.
Yeah, and these patterns, I was just thinking, about what you were saying earlier about the more authoritarian approach, and I think that this is often the approach that people take when they don't really know how to lead, because this is often what they've learned from parents. I mean, I know that it may seem like a strange connection to think about that, but this is like the older way of parenting is you just tell people what to do, right?
Yeah.
And so this is what seems like the easiest thing to do. And especially if there's a hierarchy, it seems like it would make sense. And especially now with the current, situation in government, we're seeing this kind of, I'm not going to call it leadership or behavior. Let's just call it a behavior
Mm-hmm.
that ends up with people fearing to do things or say things, etc. What do you think is the impact of that on leaders in companies? Do they look at that and think, "Oh, this is how we should be leading," or do you think it's the
Absolutely.
opposite?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you mentioned parenting, but we have to think about where all of this stuff kind of stems from. And it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about if you are truly a leader and you are leading a space or you are leading people, it is your responsibility to show them uh, the path of least resistance forward, right? And for a long time, like you said, that authoritarian approach worked. You see how down here in the U.S. we are absolutely modeling that kind of leadership from the top down, and you start to see kind of how much attention and how much exception and adoption kind of comes with it, and you'll start seeing people mimic the kind of leadership that you have. And it's, where do you think the parents got it, right? The parents have to function in this world. They've got to see what leaders are doing. So they modeled that, and then the kids look at the parents and they say, okay, well, that's how everybody else does it, so I'm going to do it this way too. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing. It just means that that's what most people are doing. And if you, for me, if I'm creating this culture of you do what I say when I say it, what happens when I'm wrong? You know, if I am in charge of all of these decisions and I've got to build this company, at some point I'm going to be wrong because I am a human being. And I need people that I trust around me to be able to look at me and say, if you do this, you will run this company into the ground. And I have to be in a place where I can hear that and I can take that in without ego and say, you know what, maybe I don't have all of the right answers. Maybe I am fallible because I am a human being, and these people know me well enough and they know the business well enough to kind of tell me what is and is not working. When you have these large organizations, you know, Amazon has come out and said it. Netflix traditionally has not had an excellent culture. Google is also, you know, they have great campuses, but they work you a lot. You have these larger businesses that are kind of setting the tone for what the workforce is going to look like. And they set their tone based on what the government is doing because they're reliant on what the government is doing to be able to function in their space. So we see it modeled and we see everything modeled from the top down, and then we just accept it, and it's our choice whether we accept it or not. And I think that we're going to start seeing, we may see a little bit of a fracture and a split for a little while we kind of figure out what is and what isn't working. And one way will fall to the wayside because it doesn't work, and the other side will continue to grow and build. And then as a society and global society, we'll be able to say, like, these people are getting it right. They're doing the right things. Like, let's model that. And then that becomes what everybody else models. It's cyclical. It's a trend, just like everything else, in this world. But if we really start setting this tone, then I think, are doing a disservice not only to ourselves, but to the people that rely on us, especially as, if we are the leaders leading the space.
Yeah. And I do think it is often also a missed opportunity because you're not actually truly tapping into the talent that you've hired if you're in an authoritarian type of culture, because people aren't willing to contribute or aren't asked to contribute nearly as often. They're maybe asked to put in the time or the hours or to do, carry out errands, but you can actually achieve so much more if you're truly tapping into that talent. And so, as you said, it seems interesting to see what the trends are. And in my work, I've been working a lot with Asian cultures and companies in Asia Pacific, which are getting rid of the more authoritarian, aggressive behaviors and replacing them with a coaching approach to be able to explore the opportunities and options that perhaps haven't been considered yet. And because those people are going through much more change, as we are all facing change, those conversations are making more sense because the person that's in the leadership role may not necessarily be aware of what needs to happen. So through that collaboration, they're able to understand better what is the customer actually, wanting now at this point in time, because that change is happening so much faster. The model of the business also has to shift to reflect that, and how can we track what's happening. So I've been working with a lot of companies where they're removing the hierarchy, the bureaucracy, and they're really focusing on the collaboration and the conversations that are taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
don't
that's
mean
okay.
to interrupt you.
And I was just going to say, at first, it was a really tough thing for people to get their head around because they're used to be behaving in certain ways. And so, for example, in China, it was in a manufacturing facility where the leader was so used to being the one calling all the shots. And he had to say, okay, I'm going to just remove myself. If something happens, I'm going to let them handle it. And I'm going to trust that they can do this. It was really hard for him to trust. And then he really had to just witness it happening to see how they handled the situation without him jumping in to solve their problems. And so that's the pattern that I've been seeing in the past few years of shifting from the micromanagement authoritarian approach to supporting and coaching and observing where they actually need to be investing their energy most, right?
Yeah.
Because if we try and do everything, solve all the problems for everyone, that's when we get burnout. And that's a pattern that I see over and over again, where I think it often is a blind spot for leaders.
I totally agree. And you mentioned, those Eastern cultures, even the way that they've approached business and contracts, they're much more relational kind of in how they do that. And their contracts are generally more forgiving, or they fluctuate a little bit more than kind of how we do them in Western cultures. And I think that there's a lot to learn from that, especially as I think they're a little further ahead of us in the West, in where we're going to kind of catch up to that relational kind of leadership. And we see how well China is doing in a lot of areas over there and how they're developing so quickly and what they've got going on. I think that I think it's harder, and I think it takes more work to lead that way, because humans are, bless us, we want to do so well, right? But we're just naturally wired to bring the people we like with us. We're wired for nepotism. We're wired for this more authoritarian approach. Like, we're wired to do things the easy way. So it takes a lot more work to kind of retrain your little human brain to be able to think in this way, to have these conversations, to lead a little bit differently. But like we've said so many times in this, like, you put that little bit of work in up front, and down the road, you're way better off than you would have been.
Yeah, and I think that we really need that creativity now, right? Which just doesn't come out of authoritarian conversations. It rarely leads to creative solutions and innovation, and having that safety to be able to propose things, being able to share and speak up, I think, is often something that companies struggle to create that space. And just thinking back to some of the banks that I worked with in Australia a few years ago, they ended up with unethical practices because no one spoke up. And then they were investigated by the government and had to introduce workshops on speaking up. So I was a part of that process. And you just realize what can go wrong and how much it can cost an organization if they create this kind of culture where nobody addresses the important things in the room that need to be discussed. Because they were not addressing them because they thought they're going to get a better bottom line by having these practices, but in the end, it ended up costing them a lot, and lost customers because of those practices. So, sometimes what seems like the easiest path is definitely not. But I wanted to just bring us back to, the disruption that we're looking at with AI, because I think that this is a concern. There's a lot of fear, and I'm curious what you think. Do you think that leaders are addressing the disruption that is going to be happening? Do you think that they're underestimating? What's your sense of where people are at with this now?
Yeah, I think that right now we're kind of in two camps. And the reason is we're starting to see this AI conversation pop up in kind of these tech sectors, which in my experience has taken at least 5 to 10 years to trickle down into your more traditional spaces. So the people that are working with it and see it and see the incredible value that it has and what it can do, I think are seeing it for what it is. I mentioned they're looking at it like it's the new internet, right? We're going into this technological revolution, like we had the industrial revolution, and we'll start to see completely new industries pop up, like we saw hotel chains and gas stations when interstates came in. And I just don't think that more traditional environments, when I say more traditional, I'm talking smaller businesses, more mom and pop, under 10 million a year, that are not necessarily in the tech space. So they're still functioning very well in the way things have worked traditionally. And they just haven't seen what AI in its whole can do for a company, and I think they're probably a little bit behind on it. So I think if you want to be part of the leading edge, I think that that agentic AI, these large language models of AI like ChatGPT, I think that there are uses that a lot of people are using them for, but they're not using them to their full capabilities yet, and that will take time, right? It's going to take time for it all to kind of the knowledge to trickle down. Some people may never get it, and I think that in the next 20 years, if you haven't incorporated it in some part of your business, you will be I think if you make it, I think you're going to be struggling pretty good, because people are going to get used to how fast and how smooth the larger companies, these tech companies that are coming up to make lives a lot easier. I think people as a whole, society, will get used to how quick and smooth and fast those processes are. And then they're going to try to come back into this traditional space, and it's going to take much, much longer because you now have a lot of the human element in there. So there are pros and cons to both, right? Are we going to want, as a society, are we going to want more human interaction? I think with involving AI, yeah, we will in some areas. But I think that if we look at society's behavior and kind of how we've adopted all of these new platforms like, Airbnb or whatever tech app you want to think of, you can hop in the app, you can do 6 things in 3 minutes, and you're done. You involve people in that process, and it takes a lot longer, but you do have that human relationship that makes you feel a little bit more secure and gives you that secondhand knowledge to kind of get you where you need to go by being able to talk it out. So how do we balance it as we continue to build this? But I think absolutely, as a whole, you have the camp that is definitely taking it, they're going to run with it, and then you have the camp that's resistant to it a little bit, but will be a little slower to adopt, just because there won't necessarily be an option in another decade or two.
What are some of the use cases that you're seeing, like in the tech startups that you're working with? How are they using AI? I've seen entrepreneurs, solopreneurs especially, adopting it for various different marketing and for copywriting, etc. But I'm curious, what are some of these other uses that you're seeing right now?
Yeah. If you have a department, you can use AI in something. So if you're in marketing, you can use AI to build out your leads. You can have it run that and do your first round of leads for you, running in the background. You have AI just in little spaces, like some of the project management tools that kind of help you move your projects along a little bit faster than you would in a spreadsheet. One of the ones that I saw most recently, which I thought was very, very, very interesting, because we talk about HR, people side of things, right? I hear a lot of recruiters and HR people talking about that you need the human aspect in the recruiting process. And I don't disagree with that fully, but I got to see my first full AI interview round, and I got to see the feedback that it gave based on the interview that I gave it. So the way that it worked, I sat and had a conversation with an AI bot, which very clearly he was AI. We're not that good yet. And he would ask me a question and I would answer it. And the way that it gave the information, it absorbed the information that I gave it and used it again to kind of build another question based on that, I was actually very impressed with. It's getting pretty good at being able to absorb and give information back. But what really impressed me was I got to see what it thought about me at the end, the synopsis it would give to the hiring manager. And it gave a better analysis of me as a candidate than I would say 90% of recruiters could do in the same amount of time. And that is, one, is somebody that's been on the people side. I was a little hesitant to it. I was like, I don't know if there are people who are really going to like this. I didn't necessarily, if I'm looking for jobs, I don't necessarily want to just be talking to robots all day, but if it truly does give that much better value, how do we use that? And then how do we make up the human element on the back end? How do we still make it feel really good for people while being respectful of their time? And I think that we're in a place now where it's the tech isn't quite there to feel phenomenal for humans just yet. But I think we're probably going to be there sooner than we think, where it feels, again, we talked about, you can go on this app and do 6 things in 3 minutes and be done. Well, what happens when you can do that when you're applying for jobs? If you have one website that you can do a virtual interview on, and then you have that synopsis to send, to different companies, and it does all of that for you, you just shrunk your job search time down. So we're going to have to kind of just play with it. We're kind of we're coming up on the top of the hill where we know there's going to be another side to this hill. We just don't know what's going to be there. So just playing with it, learning it, examining it, having real and honest conversations about what the good and bad are. But, you know, if you're taking away the interview process, which is one of the processes that these teams tend to hold on to, is the human aspect of business, I think we're probably moving a little further down that path than we think we are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I was just reflecting on, I've been hearing my partner talking to ChatGPT about some of his ideas. And just the little things that I've noticed is that he's frequently telling it to stop talking. Like, please stop talking, stop talking. And sometimes, it seems to catch on that it needs to pause, but often it just keeps on talking, which is interesting. But I've also heard it respond in very empathetic and, very human-like ways as well, depending on the moment. So I found that to be interesting, just as an observer, to listen to that, and I can see how it could work. What are some of the things that you found in that interview that didn't make it a good experience for you?
Yeah, you actually, when you said that, it brought this up for me, was when he was asking me a question, the cadence of speech, right? And AI is not quite human yet. So I would get a lot of false positives on when I needed to start talking. And I wanted to test how he would react to me giving him feedback in that moment. So I was like, hey, like, we're getting a couple of false starts here, we need to, and I took it kind of back to the human understanding of speech cadence. And I could tell that it was almost a very human-like response when it was like, well, thank you for that candid feedback, but it had a tone of almost like it was upset with me. And I was like, I can't live like this. I cannot. I can't have AI upset with me too, right? But it was that conversation with an AI chatbot that really made me stop and think, like, oh no, like, are we just creating different humans that are going to have the exact same kind of engagement issues? And we'll see, right? The more that those AI, large language models kind of interact with humans, are they going to change? Are they going to kind of change themselves for us to be better on par? And I think that was the most frustrating part for me, kind of in that process of learning this AI interview, was I don't feel like I'm getting that connection with the company, right? Like, if this is a company that I really want to work for, and this was a super cool, test project, if this is something that I really want to do, like, if we take the data that comes back about how many people really want to work in companies that they care about and care for, are we giving them that investment, that emotional investment, back early on? And I think with AI, in the way that I just talked about it, I think the answer is no. But if we can, like I said earlier, if we can supplement that kind of AI process with a really cool human experience on the back end somehow, how do we replicate that? How do we create that? I think that's going to be our sweet spot.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about. And, I guess there's so much bias that goes into the hiring process currently still. I know that some of my clients have hired people, based on their degree, where they got their degree from. Some of those people ended up being really creating so much chaos in their organizations because they just they weren't collaborative. They weren't really able to engage in a respectful way with others because they had developed such an ego. And so where do you think AI might fit in for really assessing like personality fit and who you want in terms of character? Because it can be so hard, I think, in a human interview to assess those things, in one conversation or in a few conversations. And then it's too late. You've got the person, they seem great, and then they're not, right?
I think that the way that particular product interacted with me, the way that it gauged culture fit was it asked specific questions. So it would give you multiple choice questions in the little chat section. And the first section was chat, where you could have a typing conversation, and then you still had to have the video. So you were doing, it was, again, it was a little bit messy, but they're getting there. But that understanding of culture is the biggest aspect, I think, of the right person in the right seat. And it did an okay job, but you also have to know what questions to ask to get it to tell you that feedback. So I think there's an opportunity, and there's a ton of learning and knowledge that needs to be done kind of in the personality assessments and how and where the bias kind of comes into those things. But I think if we do it very carefully, I think we can kind of integrate all of that together. If you are the kind of company that likes to do kind of those culture analysis fits, you can train a large language model to kind of do the same thing and to spit out based on specific keywords or the way that you answer these questions about culture. You have more space in the cloud than you do in a human brain to be able to have all of these statistics and data backing you up. So if someone says a key phrase, let's pretend what that is, that we know is indicative of ego, then an AI could flag that, because they would have this whole database of things that says, okay, they said this, of the people that say these things, 85% of them have culture problems. So I think once it gets better, once we continue training it and we put all of that information into its brain, I think it will do a better job of being able to read people. I asked ChatGPT the other day, based on what you know about me and my personality, what do I struggle with? What are things that I may not know about myself that are not good things? And it read me like a book. And
Really?
I was impressed, and I wasn't insulted, but I was like, you know what? You're right, ChatGPT. You are so right. I will work on that, and I'm sorry. So it's we're starting to kind of see that they have the ability to read humans better than humans have the ability to read humans, because though they still have bias, they may have far less bias than any normal person that you pick up off the street. So there's again, pros and cons to all of this. We've just really got to be careful on the way that we implement it, so we don't drive ourselves really fast down the wrong path.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, what do you think are the most important things that we can be doing right now to help ourselves be equipped for the, turning this corner?
Yeah, definitely study up on those large language models and the agentic AI. Those are what's kind of coming next. We'll start seeing, these humanoid robots kind of come out, and we're going to have to be able to know. I think that's, going to be the new kind of manufacturing path, I think. Again, I'm not an expert in that particular thing, but if I'm reading kind of how the trends of tech have gone, and where and how fast they're moving right now, I think that we're going to be in a place where we have to have this knowledge sooner rather than later. And that is on a global scale, not necessarily just in the US. I think that we have a lot to focus on there. And I think that while we are focusing on that, we need to be having the conversations around what our people structures are going to look like. And what do we do, not only about how the people structures look in business, because I've seen entire org charts built out of AI agents, and you have an entire company running that it looks like a human org chart, but it's just other bots. So we will at some point have entire companies that are run just like that. So if that is the case, if that is where this is going, then we need to be able to understand the people and the operation structures of businesses and of companies, even if you haven't been in that space before. Because if you have to build a business, your AI could probably teach you at some point, but you'll still need to know if and when AI is going to be a little bit wrong. You'll always have this age of innovation where humans will have, AI is trained by humans. It will start training itself, but you still will have the opportunity for both sides to come up with these new innovative ideas that you can keep taking down another path. I think that that's where we're going to have to start focusing kind of in the human aspect of these things.
Mm-hmm. I'm waiting for customer service to improve because certainly it's such a frustrating experience with the automation.
Yes.
And I was
Yes.
actually explaining this difference between automation and AI to my mother the other day because she said, "Oh, it's AI." I was all frustrated and I said, "No, no, no, no. That's not AI. That's
Yeah.
automation."
There is a
um,
big difference. I think that that's a really good key point.
Yeah, and I'm looking for where it's going to improve our experiences and looking forward to those areas. And at the same time, I do think that, as you say, you need to really be able to have that relational component with it as well, where it receives the feedback so that you can improve the dialogue or experience. Otherwise, then it's an authoritarian type of AI where it's not possible to advance the conversation or to actually get anywhere, right? So I'm just thinking of the current blocks that I run into when I'm trying to resolve something and spending 40 minutes on a call waiting for someone to pick up the call
Yeah.
after you've gone through all the options on the menu, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking
These
another.
the current customer service automations and tech are, I would say, bottom of the barrel for where we're going. So I also cannot wait for that to get better because I think there's a ton of opportunity there.
Well, even getting connected with the right person. My partner, I know, was just on a call with one of his banks, and he got passed around to 5 different people to try and sort out his situation, right? So just knowing who to reach out to, or if it's not a person, where can you actually get the situation resolved? Because we waste so much time with this kind of thing, and that's I think very precious, right? For actually trying to improve the customer experience and trying to make it more efficient. And I think that a lot of businesses lose in that area because of the current setup that they have. So that's one area I definitely see for improvement. And I've seen um, some of the applications have been also in looking at pricing, setting up pricing. Some of the startups that I've worked with, where they're trying to find the correct price point for certain products. It's been helping them that way. I've seen marketplaces where they're trying to match certain services with certain customers. So it's making some businesses possible that perhaps weren't possible before because it was just too hard to do some of those things. So I'm definitely curious to see how it evolves. And I think it would be great to come together again, in a
Love that.
couple of months and see where things are at that time, because it's certainly going to change now that people are getting more awareness. I know last year when I was working with my executive clients, they were very much in that place of just trying to get their head around this and what this will mean, what they should be thinking about, where to invest. And so
Mhm.
the sort of impact that has is going to be different depending on where they choose to invest in their companies. So I'm curious to see how things evolve and to hear from you then to see what your observations have been.
I cannot wait to see where we are in a few months with this. And, just like you said, just a few months ago, people were just trying to get their head around it. And now look at us, we're having, larger conversations around it. So I'm so excited to get back together in a couple of months. I think that would be such a fun conversation.
Elle, is there any last final thing that you'd like to share with the audience in terms of what we've talked about today that you think would be valuable for them to be thinking about?
I think that I'm just glad we're having this conversation. And I hope that what people take away is, not necessarily having to jump on, one bandwagon or the other, or even having to think that you have to have an answer right now. I think that my main goal for right now is let's have more conversations about what's happening and what it could look like and where we could go with it. Because the more we have these conversations, and the less that we have this automatic, especially down here right now, this automatic taking of sides on what is good or what is bad. I think that these conversations are truly where the growth is going to happen, and being able to have them in this way is so special, especially kind of in a space where it's so limited. So Thank you so
Yeah.
much for doing this with me. I had so much fun, and I love doing these. And I can't wait to see where we are in a few months.
Yeah, I love what you're saying because yeah, you're right. So often people end up in this black or white thinking, good or bad, and we really need to move beyond good or bad to think what's possible for us with this because it's here and putting it as bad isn't going to be helpful. And we can't say it's all going to be good either, right? It's going to be
Right.
disruptive. So we really need to be having the conversations to look at what's possible and learning as we go. So thank you for making the time today. I really enjoyed learning from you as well. And for anyone that's listening to this, we'd love your comments about what you thought was valuable, what you thought was interesting for you. And if you're interested in joining us for a future conversation, please reach out and let us know as well, because I think it would be fascinating to have a larger panel for this type of conversation in the coming months.